you everyone to be seated. So, Mr. Sullivan, who's your next witness?
Yes, Your Honor. Defendants call me a Libby.
If you would step this way, please. You would stand here, face the court, raise your right hand.
You do solemnly swear from the testimony given in this case to be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God.
If you would step this way, watch your step there. Have a seat. And I'm not a good person.
Okay.
Speak into that.
Good afternoon, Ms. Libby.
Good afternoon.
Would you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Yes, I'm Mia Libby.
And where do you work at?
I work at Gawker Media.
What's your title at Gawker Media?
My title is Senior Vice President of Global Sales and Partnerships.
I'd like to talk to you a little bit about that position, but before we do, I just want to talk a little bit about your background. Where did you go to college?
I went to college, I went to Hamilton College in upstate New York.
When did you graduate?
2004.
What was your first job after college?
First job was at Entertainment Weekly, a magazine that's owned by the publishing company Time Inc. I was an assistant in the marketing department.
And how long were you at Time Inc.?
About 2.5 years.
What were you doing during those 2.5 years?
So I held a variety of positions there, on the print side and on the digital side, all in the marketing and sales development department.
And when you talk about marketing and sales, is this ad sales?
Correct, ad sales.
So you were selling advertisements for Entertainment Weekly and Time Inc. publications?
Yes, correct.
And what did you do after you were at Time Inc.?
I went to Condé Nast.
What's Condé Nast?
So Condé Nast is another publishing company, much like Time Inc. They publish magazines such as Vanity Fair, Golf Digest, GQ, Wired Magazine.
And what were you doing while you were at Condé Nast?
So when I started at Condé Nast, I was at a website called style.com, and I was the business manager there, which means that I worked with senior management on our projections, pipeline, really the numbers.
And then what did you do?
Then from there I went on to Wired magazine. That was my first role as a salesperson, where I actually held a list of accounts and personally went out and sold the pages in a magazine and the ads on the website.
So what's an account?
An account is it's another word for an advertiser. Samsung is an account. Microsoft is an account.
So these are folks that you were talking to advertise in Wired magazine at that time?
Yes, exactly.
And in ad lingo, you call those accounts?
Correct.
Okay. How long did you end up working at Condé Nast?
I was at Condé Nast for just a little over 5 years.
And I take it from what you just explained, during all 5 of those years, you were basically working with advertising?
Yes, I was.
Where did you go after Condé Nast?
After Condé Nast, I went to Gawker Media.
When was that?
That was January of 2012.
Could you tell the jury just a little bit about why you decided to go to Gawker Media?
Sure. I had 2 main reasons for wanting to move over to Gawker. First of all, I was a big fan of Gawker and Jezebel specifically. And then also, Condé Nast was a wonderful and very popular company, but it was really led with magazines and with print, and all the innovation in my business on the advertising side is really happening with digital brands, and I loved that Gawker was a digital-first company, so I felt like I was going to have the opportunity to really grow my career there.
And so you've been at Gawker Media continuously then since January 2012?
Correct, a little over 4 years.
What jobs have you held at Gawker?
A few. My first job was, I was a senior member of the sales team. I still had an account list. My title was sales director. I then got promoted to East Coast Sales Director, which means that I still held a list, a smaller list, but I ran the East Coast sales team. From there, I was promoted to Executive Director of East Coast and Midwest Sales, so I ran the East Coast team and the Midwest team. From there, I was promoted to Vice President of National Sales, which means that I ran the entire sales team across the country. And then most recently, I've been promoted to Senior Vice President of Global Sales and Partnerships, which means that I not only run the sales team, but the support teams associated with that.
So at this point, you're in charge of all advertising at Gawker Media?
Yes, correct.
And you mentioned that there's different teams. What teams are there within that advertising universe?
So there's the sales team, there's the ad operations team, there's the creative team, and there is the account management team.
So you're, just to summarize, you oversee the people kind of soup to nuts from the sale all the way through to the time that it shows up on Gawker's websites?
Exactly.
So, kind of reviewing in my mind, since you started your career, you've been in the publishing industry for about 12 years.
That's right.
And during that time, have you ever worked as a journalist?
No, I'm not a writer.
Everything has been on the business advertising side?
Everything.
What is the difference between the advertising side and the editorial side at a company like Gawker?
It's really, I mean, you have to think of it as two completely separate career paths. The editorial team, they're writers, they're journalists. The advertising team, they're business people. They're the people who are working on ways to make money for the company.
Are there folks who work in both ad sales and on the editorial journalism side?
No.
Do you interact with editors or reporters, journalists on the editorial side?
No, not really. We're on two different floors in our office, so the interaction doesn't come all that naturally. I might see senior level members of the editorial team in managerial company meetings, but we're not working together on a regular basis at all.
What kind of things come up in those managerial meetings? Is that editorial discussions? Or?
No, they're more about things that are facing the company. We might be talking about when to move to a new office, or how many times a week should we be serving lunch to everyone? Things like that.
Operational issues?
Operational, yes.
Does the ad department have any control or say over the editorial side?
No, certainly not.
Why is that?
Well, we're two very distinct departments. I mean, it's really important that the edit side keeps their integrity and is not forced into doing anything that the advertising side wants it to do.
Why is that?
So think about a newspaper or a magazine that you might read or you might be a fan of. I would be upset to learn that an advertiser was telling the writers what to write or what not to write. You rely on these outlets to be honest and impartial, so we have to maintain that line. It's very important at Gawker.
Does the ad sales group ever attempt to exert any control on the editorial side?
No, certainly not.
What about the flip? Does the editorial side have any sway or do anything in the ad side?
No.
Shifting gears slightly, you, having worked at Gawker since January 2012, I want to kind of go back in time to a time that we've been talking about here in the courtroom quite a bit, October 2012.
Yep.
What were you doing at Gawker at that point?
I was a salesperson.
In the ad department?
In the ad department.
In that time, in October 2012, what was the primary way that Gawker would make money?
Display advertising.
What do you mean by display advertising?
A display ad refers to any advertisement you'd see on any web page on any website. So let's say you pulled up USA Today. You'd see the homepage of USA Today if you type that into your browser. Any ads you would see on that page, those are called display ads.
So you pull up the web page and it has something at the top of the page.
You would probably see a rectangular ad at the top of the page. That's a display ad. You would probably see a square, maybe on the left-hand side or the right-hand side. That's a display ad as well.
And that's back in 2012 in October. That's how Gawker was making its money.
Correct.
At that time, again, back in October 2012, what were some of the leading companies that would advertise at Gawker?
Intel, Samsung, Turner, ABC, Comedy Central, large Fortune 500 household names.
Again, going back into this October 2012 time period, kind of walk us through, if you could, how ad sales work. Just in a nutshell, how does it go from an idea to winding up on the page?
So it starts with meetings, usually a few meetings, where the sales team actually goes in and meets with people either at the company or with the agency that represents them. They go in and talk about our brands and why we do what we do, and the different ways that we can work together, the different ways we can help them achieve their goals. From there, the hope is that we would get the opportunity to submit a proposal to them. They come to us and they give us all the information for a specific campaign they would want to work on, the goals of that campaign, what they're trying to achieve, really. And then we put together a proposal, a media plan, which has all the information you need all the information that the advertiser needs to decide whether or not they want to buy the campaign. And hopefully they do.
And what's in a media plan? What does that mean?
So a media plan is, like I said, it's the thing that an advertiser will refer to know exactly where their ads are going to run.
So what's in it? What are the elements of a media plan?
Okay, so there are 4 fundamental things in a media plan. The first thing is where the ad's going to run. The second thing is, and that will usually include the size of the ad. The second thing is the date range, which the client usually provides to us. These are the dates they want to run. The next thing is the rate, how much they would be charged. And then also the final thing would be the views, the number of views they would receive for each one of those placements.
And in online advertising lingo, what do you call those views?
The views are called impressions.
So I want to spend a minute asking you about impressions. What is an impression?
Okay. An impression is one view of one ad unit, one time. So let's use USA Today again. You type USA Today into your computer, up comes the homepage of USA Today, and you see an ad unit. That is one impression that was served to you one time. So that counts as one impression.
For an impression, does somebody have to click on the ad?
No.
So the idea is when the screen comes up, you see an advertisement on it. One time it comes up, that's one impression.
That's one impression, yes.
And when you were talking about the media plan, you mentioned that advertisers buy impressions. What does that mean?
That means that they buy a certain number of impressions or views for the duration of their campaign.
How does that happen? How does somebody buy impressions?
So the way that, because impressions are sold on a very large volume, the way they're priced is by the 1,000. So they're grouped into bunches of 1,000, and that's how they're sold. So the rate is actually called a CPM. That stands for cost per thousand. And so we apply a rate, and every other publisher does this. This is the way it works. We apply a CPM to that bundle of 1,000 impressions.
I want to ask you about the CPM, but before we get there, how far in advance is this done? When is a company, how far in advance are they buying ads?
Before their campaign launches?
Correct.
Rarely something might come in 2 or 3 weeks before, but for the most part, it's 2 to 3 months before the start of the campaign.
So somebody comes to you, company comes to you and says, we want to advertise on Gawker. You put together this media plan. They say, we want to buy however many thousand impressions. That's done 2 to 3 months before the ads actually run on the site?
Yes, exactly.
Do you sell ads, or not just you, but does Gawker Media sell ads around specific stories?
Not around a specific story. We do sell ads around topics. So, Nokia may want to buy all of the content on Gizmodo about smartphones. That would be an example of something we would sell, but it's not, we have this specific article coming, do you want to own it?
Why is that?
We don't know that months in advance what our writers are going to be writing about.
Now, you talked in the media plan, and this kind of comes back to the CPM that you mentioned. You talked about the rates that an advertiser would pay. How does Gawker Media charge advertisers for an impression?
For one impression?
Right. How does it set that rate?
It's by the 1,000. So we only charge by the 1,000. We don't charge for one impression.
And so people come to you and buy in like groups of 1,000 impressions?
Yes.
And how much does 1,000 view? Well, going back into October 2012, how much would 1,000 impressions cost?
In 2012, I believe our average CPM, so our average cost per 1,000, was $7.58 for 1,000 impressions.
Right. And so how much does an individual impression cost if you were going to break that down, one view?
Roughly 0.00758 of a penny, so 3/4 of a penny.
Yeah, 3/4 of a cent?
Yes, 3/4 of a cent for one impression.
So if somebody were going to buy, if a company were going to buy 1 million impressions, doing the math, it's about $7,500.
For 1 million impressions, yes.
Is there, or back in October 2012, was there a standard base rate for advertising?
Yeah, so we use, on an annual basis, we set our rate card, which includes the low end of the rates and the high end of the rates for various budget levels, different categories of clients. But yes, there's a minimum that we would go to, and there's a sort of standard that we expect each placement to cost.
When would that be set?
That we usually set that in December for the upcoming year.
And so back in 2012, the rate would be set the end of 2011, and it continued through 2012?
Correct.
When you set that rate, when Gawker Media sets that rate, does it take into account the amount of traffic that a site is generating?
No, traffic's not really one of the factors that we use to determine what the rates should be.
What factors do you consider?
Overall budget, relationship with the client. If it's a specific category, we might be willing to give them a break. If it's a category that tends to spend less, but we still want the opportunity to work with them. Historicals, what the client has spent with us before, and market pressures will often have something to do with it. If the market's doing well, if people are spending or not.
I probably didn't ask a very good question. When Gawker Media sets its standard base rates, what factors is it considering? You said it didn't consider traffic. Are those the things that Gawker Media considers in setting the base rate?
Yes, those are the things we discuss when we're putting together the base rates for each client and budget.
Is there an issue with respect to inventory?
No, and this is common, we don't sell 100% of the available inventory or space that we have available.
Well, first explain, what is inventory?
Inventory is the space available. So the amount of impressions that are available to sell on a given month, let's say, we're not selling out. And that's common.
So if there's 10 million page views available, what you're saying is there's not enough ads to fill those page views.
Correct. If there are 10 million impressions available for 1 month, we might sell 5 or 6 million in total.
Does Gawker Media charge more if there's more readers?
No.
If the site increases traffic over time, does the rate charge increase?
No.
If a site is more popular, can you charge a higher rate?
No. Again, we're not selling out completely, so there would be no reason to. And the market, advertisers dictate what they're willing to spend and what they're willing to pay for each unit, and by site. So we can't. That dictates a lot of what we're able to do.
So earlier you had mentioned that an advertiser would buy a bulk of impressions. Say that somebody in 2012 bought 100,000 impressions. They came to you and bought 100,000 impressions worth of ads. What happens once that 100,000 impressions is reached?
The ads stop running.
So once the ad shows up 100,000 times, even if there's more views, the ads stop.
That's correct.
If more than 100,000 people end up seeing an ad, does the advertiser pay more?
No. When we agree upon a campaign, the advertiser signs off on a very specific budget level. If we, for some reason, over-deliver on a campaign, we can't say, oh, you have to pay us twice as much. They wouldn't stand for that.
In the ad sales group, do you all review Gawker's traffic statistics on a regular basis?
No, the numbers are updated in our sales materials, but we're not looking at those numbers on a regular basis.
Why not?
Traffic's it's an important number for us, but it's not something that we need to know on a regular and very timely basis.
Doesn't having a lot of traffic mean that you can sell more ads, though?
We're not selling out completely, so we don't need more traffic to sell more ads.
What do you mean by that?
So, okay, let's say you run a grocery store. Just because you ordered 3 times as many bananas as you did the week before, it doesn't mean that you're going to sell 3 times as many bananas. We are selling, roughly 50 to 60% of the inventory we have available, so getting more traffic does not necessarily give us the opportunity to sell more if there's not more demand for it.
That 50 to 60% number, is that the amount of ad space that you're selling right now?
That's right now.
Do you know what it was back in 2012?
I don't know what it was. If I'm going to guess, it was less.
If Gawker publishes a story, we've been talking about this Hulk Hogan post that had a big spike in traffic. If Gawker publishes a story that has that kind of big spike in readers, does that change the rate that advertisers pay at all?
No.
Why is that?
Because again, our rates are set. We wouldn't go back to an advertiser and say, we just got a ton of traffic. You should, all of a sudden your rates are doubling. That's not the way it works, and we have a contract with them where we told them this is how much it's going to cost for you to run on our sites.
So today, if you got a big story that spiked, the ads, if I understood what you said earlier, the ads would have been sold 2 to 3 months ago.
Correct.
If Gawker publishes an article with advertising that gets a big spike in views, does that generate more revenue?
No.
Why not?
Again, we've agreed upon what the budget for each advertiser's campaign is going to be. In most cases, 2 to 3 months ahead of time. So just because it gets a jump in traffic, just even if an advertiser owns all the ads on a specific story or on around specific content, that would just be an over delivery for them. They would get more for the amount that we agreed they would pay.
Now, if Gawker publishes a post that doesn't have any advertising on it, but still gets a big number of views, does that generate revenue?
No. None.
Why is that?
Because ads are the only way that we monetize our content.
One of the things that we've talked about a bit in the courtroom before you got here is the concept of not safe for work, NSFW. I guess before you had mentioned that only 50% of the inventory has ads on it. So some things just naturally appear without ads, some stories.
Yes.
And then for NSFW, what does that mean as far as ads go?
So NSFW stands for Not Safe for Work. That will include any article that someone in editorial publishes that is explicit in nature, that we know an advertiser would not want to surround. But it's also a term that we've come to use internally to categorize basically any article that an advertiser would not want to surround. So that includes general news stories, a story about a terrorist attack or an airline crash or a school shooting. These are things that advertisers in general do not want to surround. So we file that under NSFW, and it has the same treatment where no ads will run on that page, on that story.
So the idea is that the advertisers that y'all have don't want to be associated with sexually explicit material or this sort of bad news type stuff.
Correct.
What's the mechanism that Gawker Media uses to ensure that ads don't appear on not safe for work content?
So we work with editorial to tag all stories that are considered NSFW as such. So they tag them NSFW, and what that does is that triggers an automatic collapse of all the ads on that story. So once that story is published, automatically all the ads are shut. When I say collapse, I mean all the ads are shut down on the page. You would never see an ad running on that story. And it happens at the point of that story being published. It's very, very important to us. We're very conservative about it.
Why is it important to you?
Because we need to give our advertisers the best experience in working with us, and we do not want to risk them running alongside a story that they would not want to be associated with.
In the ad group, how do y'all view not safe for work content?
Well, first of all, it's a missed opportunity. We can't sell it. We can't sell any ads on it, so it's a missed opportunity for us. It also, to be honest, it makes our job harder. We have to talk about this stuff with many clients and advertisers. Like I said, they don't want to run on stories like this, so we have to explain, all of our mechanisms that we have in place to make sure your ads are not going to run on stories like this. It makes things harder for us that stories like this are published.
Is NSFW content valuable to Gawker?
No. Like I said, it makes our jobs harder.
Thank you. That's all the questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Did you come into Gawker, I think, was it around the 2011 time period?
It was January 2012.
Did you come in with Mr. Gorenstein?
I started a few months after him.
He was originally at Condé Nast, right?
Correct.
And you all worked there together?
Yes, we did.
And we heard some testimony from him earlier in the trial that in the 2012 time period, Gawker was in a growth phase. Would you agree with that?
A growth phase? Yes.
And I think your testimony earlier today was that in the 2012 time period, you were only using display ads. Is that right?
That was the bulk of our revenue.
What are the other types of advertising?
So the other type of advertising is something called native advertising.
And what is that?
So that involves, that's what our creative team will do. That involves creating something more custom for advertisers. So working closely with them to create stories that we can run on our sites that help tell the story of their product or their business.
And over the past few years, has Gawker started using more of that advertising?
I don't know if I would say more, but it's still a large part of our business.
Has revenue increased in that area?
Yes.
What about e-commerce?
I don't handle e-commerce. I mean, I know about it, of course. It has grown over the years, but that doesn't fall under my domain.
Do you know what e-commerce is?
Yes.
What is it?
What is it in terms of what we do?
Yes.
So the commerce team will work closely with various companies to help create specialized posts that will help them to sell various products. So mattresses, shoes, kettles that warm up water, various things.
So you're not involved in e-commerce at all?
I'm not. I don't touch that.
So you wouldn't be the person who'd be able to talk to us about whether or not e-commerce has grown, right?
No.
And then sponsored content, is that the same thing as e-commerce?
It's the same thing as native advertising.
Okay. And can you just define what sponsored content is?
Sure. So it is that those custom stories that I was talking about, we would work with an advertiser to create sort of a custom story or article. We would work together on creating it and writing it, and then they run on the sites very clearly labeled sponsored. So you always know that what you're reading is something that was paid for.
So I guess in layman's terms, one of the writers for Gawker would write a story about a product, and there'd be a link to that product in the story?
No, the writers for Gawker, our writers and editors do not ever write that content. We have a separate copy team that lives in the advertising department. They're members of my team that write the content.
So there is an aspect of your team that is involved with the content, editorial content of the website.
It's not the editorial content.
But
they're completely separate.
But it's the content that readers would see when they go to the site, correct?
It is content they would see, but it very clearly says sponsored.
And over time, as compared to 2012 to the present, has that portion of Gawker's business grown?
Yes.
How much has it grown?
I don't know the exact number.
I mean, is it above 30%?
Maybe. I don't want to speculate.
So in 2012, that was an untapped area.
No, we were doing this in 2012, certainly doing it. It was a large part of our revenue.
And I thought your testimony earlier, and I'm sorry if I misunderstood, but I thought that a majority of the revenue for Gawker was derived in 2012, at least from display ads, right?
Yes, that's correct. It was still a piece of our revenue back in 2012.
But it was a small piece, right?
A piece, yes. I don't know the exact breakdown.
Gawker's running a live stream of this trial, isn't it?
Correct.
Are there ads on the page where that live stream appears?
I don't know for sure, but I would say no. Likely no.
Bring that up. Did you have any involvement in the Hulk Hogan sex tape?
No.
Were you aware of it at the time that it was posted?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Were you aware of the video being posted on Gawker at the time, back in October 2012?
I was aware once it was posted
And how did you become aware?
because I saw it on the site.
You actually went to it and looked at the video?
I heard people talking about it, and yes, I went to the post.
Can you bring up the 16 line? This is an exhibit. You see it on your screen there?
Mm-hmm.
All right, this is an exhibit that we had looked at earlier with Mr. Dent. And it talks about there being a growth in audience of 38% over the last 12 months. This is a tweet from October of 2013. Have you ever seen this before?
No.
And if you go down underneath that, John, where the black bar is, do you see where it says Gawker Media Network?
Yes.
Is that refers to all of the sites, correct? And that's how you all refer to it as the Gawker Network?
Yeah, or Gawker Media Group.
You don't call it the Gizmodo Network, right?
No.
You don't call it the Jalopnik Network?
No.
It's the Gawker Network, right?
Correct.
And that network covers all of the websites, right?
All the sites in the group, yes.
You said traffic is important to you, right?
It's important for certain things.
What things is it important for?
It conveys brand relevance, that the sites are something that people want to come to.
You said brand relevance?
Yeah, brand meaning the media brand. It means that these are sites people are visiting regularly.
When you say the media brand, you're referring to the Gawker brand?
Gawker or Gizmodo or Jalopnik, correct.
When you go and you pitch to advertisers, how often do you do that for a typical advertiser? Is it multiple times per year?
Yes,
And when you pitch to advertisers, do you discuss traffic?
sometimes.
And I think one of the things that you talked about is when you would oversell to advertisers, right? Where they'd get more hits for their money, right?
Than what we promised them?
Right.
That happens occasionally, yes.
And when that happened, was it more likely that those advertisers would come back?
No, not necessarily. It happens really quite regularly.
And I think, and I just wanted to clarify this, but I think you said currently you're selling 50 to 60% of your inventory.
Correct.
And I believe you said that in 2012 that percentage was lower.
I shouldn't speculate. I don't know. We didn't have quite the sophisticated tools in place back then that we do now to track those things.
A moment. Typically, in your experience, do advertisers want to go to sites that don't have audiences?
No.
No further questions.
Ms. Philby, I just want to follow up on two quick things that you said. Right at the end there, you mentioned that you do discuss traffic with advertisers.
Yes.
Why do you do that?
It's something we like to tell a complete picture. Everything about the brand, what it stands for, why they should be advertising there, and the number of people who are coming on a monthly basis.
But going back to our earlier discussion, does traffic have any impact on revenue?
No.
Mr. Vogt asked you about whether you recalled seeing the Hulk Hogan post that we're here discussing today.
Yes.
What was your reaction when you saw the post?
Well, my first reaction was definitely a professional one. It was just to ensure that all the ads were collapsed. I knew that needed to happen right away. And like I said, it's an automatic thing, but it's sort of we all watch each other's backs and yell out to our ad ops team and make sure that no ads are running there. So that was the first thing I did, like many other people, and yes, they confirmed all the ads were down. And then I watched it, I read AJ's article and moved on.
What did you think of the article itself?
Objection, scope, and relevance.
From an advertising perspective, what was the reaction to the Hulk Hogan post?
From our advertisers?
Yes.
We didn't get a reaction from them.
No positive reaction, negative reaction?
No, neither.
Yeah. Kind of a non-event?
Correct.
Thank you. No further questions.
If our jurors have any questions, please. Miss Libby, did you watch the video?
I did.
Any follow-up? Any follow-up? And the second question is, did you raise the CPM rate from 2012 to 2013?
We did, yes. The average CPM did go up. I believe it was, we raised them probably roughly 10% year over year.
Why did you raise the CPM between 2012 and 2013?
We were becoming a much bigger, better sales force. We had more people. We had more people with good relationships who knew what they were doing. We were able to command a higher rate.
Any follow-up, Mr. Bill? Any of the jury questions? Thank you, Ms. Libby. Thank you. Mr. Selchuk, your next witness.
Under the defendant's call, Scott Kidder.
Mr. Kidder, if you would step this way, please. Right around the sheet here, please. Come on, sir. If you would, no, stand right here. Face the clerk, raise your right hand, please.
Do you solemnly swear affirm the testimony given in this case with the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. If you would step this way, please. Watch your step, have a seat, speak in a loud and clear voice.
Afternoon, Mr. Vitter.
Hi.
Let me just get my papers organized here for a minute and we'll get
No worries.
going. Mr. Kidder, can you tell us just a little bit about your background, introduce yourself to the jury?
Sure. I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. I went to college at New York University and graduated in 2007. And had been at Gawker for about 10 years before leaving this past December.
Do you mind moving your microphone just a hair?
Oh, sure. Sorry.
That's all right. I can hear you fine. I hope that everybody can. So you went to NYU up in New York?
I did.
And what did you study there?
I went to a school at NYU where you get to create your own major, and so I chose to study business technology and media.
When did you start working at Gawker?
I started when I was still in college in 2005.
So you were in school, you started working at Gawker. Was that a part-time position?
Correct. I started as a part-time kind of intern in 2005.
What was Gawker like when you started working there?
It was a much smaller company. I think there were maybe 10, 15 people in total. It was very kind of startup-y, to use a phrase often used.
Where was it run at that point?
It didn't really have a full-time office. It was run to some extent out of Nick's apartment, though when I started, I mostly worked in my college dorm.
How did you decide to work at Gawker while you were in school?
I had always been interested in kind of media and business and technology, and I had actually already arranged for an internship at ABC News in New York, but I had an opportunity for a second internship and saw a posting for an internship at Gawker and decided to apply to that as well, and I ended up doing both.
And what attracted you to Gawker itself?
I mean, I liked that it was a new type of media. In high school, I worked on the high school newspaper. I worked on a high school radio station, but I was kind of interested in the new kind of internet media, and I think Gawker, was even at that time a pioneer in its space.
So did you eventually take on a full-time job at Gawker?
I did. So after graduating in 2007, I began full-time as manager of finance and business development.
And what did you do as manager of finance and business development back in 2007?
So I was responsible for the day-to-day operation of the finance group, as well as assisting in business development efforts.
And at that time, again, Gawker's a fairly small company?
Yeah, it was a tiny company. It had grown in the 2 or so years I'd been there, but it was still very small.
How many people worked there?
I'd say maybe it had grown to 20, 25. We had at that point gotten an office, but I think it was something like 1,500 square feet.
And at some point, did you then get promoted?
I did. A few years later, I was promoted to director of editorial operations.
What did you do as director of editorial operations?
I oversaw the day-to-day kind of administrative tasks of the editorial departments. That meant things like budgeting, payroll, finance, kind of assisting with photo licensing efforts and things of that nature.
Did you have any editorial responsibilities?
I did not. I was not in any way responsible for editorial judgments.
Hearing what you're saying, were you basically the COO of the editorial group at that time?
Yeah, I have at times described it as kind of a mini COO of the editorial group, which was the largest department by budget and headcount of the company at that time.
Now, what is the relationship between editorial, between the writers, editors, and the business and ad people? What's the relationship at Gawker?
They're very separate. I mean, obviously, the editors see the business people, they work in the same office, though actually in our old office, they were literally on separate floors. But, the editorial functions are run, as pursuant to whatever the editors-in-chief think is right, and the business functions are really run, pretty separate.
Is there does the business side play any role in the editorial decision-making?
Certainly not on a regular basis. I mean, it is true that the editors-in-chief might sometimes speak with some sales leadership and say, hey, these certain pieces are working really well and responding to editors, but that's not a directive to publish a certain type of content. It's really more an acknowledgement that, it's all the same company.
After you were director of editorial operations, were you promoted again?
I was. The title kind of ranged over the years, but it was head of the operations department across the whole company, and the final title I used in that role was COO.
And throughout that time, your titles changed. Did your responsibilities change?
The responsibilities changed slightly, but it really only as the company grew. It was more or less the same role, head of operations, so that's responsible for things like finance, HR, facilities, and a few other things.
So I take it, at this point, you're not just serving editorial operations for the editorial group, you're talking about for the whole company.
Correct. Yeah, I sometimes said if it had something to do with people or money, it in some way touched, either me or my team.
So the different groups that you were in charge of was finance at that time?
That was one of them.
Oversaw legal?
Oversaw legal for a brief period until we hired our general counsel and now president.
And you're not a lawyer?
No, I'm not a lawyer. There were lawyers that worked on the team. I just kind of helped from an admin point of view.
And you mentioned people. You were also oversaw human resources?
Yes. So the people and culture team, or what for a time we called human resources, which includes kind of all traditional HR functions as well as things like facilities in the office.
So sort of stepping back, Gawker, it sounds like, has a somewhat unique business structure. Would it be fair to say you were operating as both a COO and CFO of the company?
Yeah, CFO isn't a title that's been used at Gawker, but I was the senior executive reporting to the CEO responsible for finance.
And then also senior executive for operations.
Correct.
And in that capacity, fair to say you had kind of a bird's eye view of the whole company?
Yeah, that's fair.
Are you still at Gawker?
I'm not. I left last December.
Why did you leave?
I'd been there 10 years. I'd learned a lot. The company had grew a lot, but I decided I was ready for something else.
And what are you doing now?
I'm currently consulting for a few other media companies.
Now, I don't mean to put you on the hot seat. Plaintiffs' counsel will probably do that in a bit, but have you received any outside recognition for your work at Gawker Media?
I was lucky enough to be named to the Forbes 30 Under 30 list 2 years in a row.
Was anybody else at Gawker Media? Did anybody else receive that recognition?
I believe that Emma Carmichael was as well.
Now, in talking about your responsibilities at Gawker, you said that you oversaw legal for some period of time.
That's correct.
Earlier in this case, there's been mention of a few different articles that have come up, and I want to ask you a couple questions about them. Last week, we heard testimony, and I think again earlier today, about a lawsuit involving the actor Eric Dane. Do you recall that lawsuit?
I do.
Do you recall when it was litigated?
Sometime I want to say around 2009, 2010.
And what do you recall about that?
It was a copyright lawsuit, and it was settled out of court.
Was there any claim other than copyright infringement? Was there any sort of invasion of privacy claim?
There was not.
Was there any right of publicity claim?
There was not.
Was there any claim for emotional distress?
There was not.
You mentioned that it settled out of court. What was the settlement payment?
It was settled for $100,000.
There were a couple other articles that have been mentioned during the course of the trial. Back in 2012, Gawker published pictures of Kate Middleton topless. Do you recall that?
I do.
Did Kate Middleton sue Gawker?
She did not.
There was some discussion in deposition testimony last week about a story involving Brett Favre. Do you recall that?
I do.
Did Brett Favre sue Gawker?
He did not.
Earlier today, there was some discussion about a series that Gawker did called Gawker Stalker. Do you remember that? Do you remember Gawker Stalker?
I'm familiar with it, and I do remember it, yes.
Were there any lawsuits over that?
There were not.
There was some discussion earlier today about George Clooney and Gawker Stalker. Did George Clooney ever sue Gawker?
He did not.
Now, I want to shift focus back to 2012, at the time when the Hulk Hogan post went up. What was your role back then?
In 2012, I think I just moved into the head of operations role.
And so at that point, you were serving as COO, CFO?
Yeah, I wasn't using that title, but that's effectively the same job.
And you recall that time period with the Hulk Hogan post?
I do.
Does Gawker.com have its own Facebook page?
It does.
Back in 2012, did Gawker.com have a Facebook page?
Yes.
Tim, can we display the third page of Plaintiff's Exhibit P63? And if you could just focus up on the top part there. So, Mr. Kidder, you weren't here earlier in the trial, but this is something that was displayed for the jury earlier. What is this that we're looking at now?
This is a screenshot of a post on the Gawker.com Facebook page.
And what post is this?
It's a post distributing and promoting the Hulk Hogan post.
Did this Facebook post include A.J. Delaria's commentary?
Other than the really brief, kind of less than a sentence excerpt you see there, no, it did not. In order to read the story, to read the commentary, or to see the video, you'd have to click through to Gawker.com.
So you answered the question I was going to ask. So the video wasn't on Facebook either?
Correct.
You mentioned, well, why does Gawker.com put out a post like this?
I mean, in 2012, and especially now, Facebook, Twitter, and other social media is just a regular way of distributing the content to the readers. So some readers come to the homepage to review it. Some readers might be sent the content from a friend via email, or some people might share the content on their own social media pages, and some readers might choose to follow Gawker.com on Facebook or on Twitter in order to get alerts of new posts like this.
Is that common in the media industry?
Yes, extremely.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, again, just kind of like I just said, in 2012, but especially now, Facebook and Twitter and other social media sites are a key way of distributing content to the readers.
Did Gawker pay anything to put this on Facebook?
No, it did not.
How frequently, back at this time, would Gawker.com update its Facebook page?
A significant number of times a day, I'd say well over a dozen. Maybe not quite every story, because a really high volume site might be just kind of too many Facebook posts, but a significant number of times a day, I'd say well over a dozen.
Who was responsible for posting things on Facebook like this or on Twitter like you mentioned?
One of the editorial staff within the site, so either maybe it was the writer itself, maybe it was the editor-in-chief, maybe it was someone else, really depended on how that specific site worked.
But these were folks on the editorial side, not on the business or ad side?
Correct.
I'd like to shift gears and talk about the actual post itself. Tim, can you pull up Defendant's Exhibit 77? And if you could just zoom in on the top part with the headline. Yeah, perfect. So, Mr. Kidder, you recognize this post?
Yes.
And this is the Hulk Hogan post that brings us here today?
Yes, this is a screenshot of that post.
If you could scroll down just a bit so we see the whole video box then, up from the directions. So where on this page is the video, I guess we're looking at?
Yeah, so the video appears above the content. When you go to the page, you'd see a still, which is what you see now, and then a play button should you want to, should the reader actually want to play and view the video.
So when somebody went to the Hulk Hogan post, this page would come up. I take it, would the video play?
The video would not autoplay. It would have to be user-initiated, so they'd have to click on the video or on the play button in order for it to start playing.
When you say click on the play button, that means the triangle there?
Yeah, that kind of sideways triangle thing.
I want to talk to you for just a little bit about the video and just a hair about the technical side of the video. Did Gawker host the video on its own servers?
Gawker did not.
You understand what I mean when I ask about hosting something on its servers?
Yeah, the videos generally, the process of kind of uploading and encoding videos and actually streaming the videos from the server to the user's computer is a rather technical and complicated one. And so Gawker had outsourced the process to a company called Vidler.
And so Vidler is the one who actually hosted this video.
Yes, so when you hit play, the video is coming from Vidler, and then Gawker had uploaded that video to Vidler.
In the experience for the reader, somebody goes to the page and it looks like everything's the same. It appears that it's all on Gawker's servers, but if I understand what you're saying, the content of the text is on your servers. The video is run through a separate company.
Yeah, to the user, it's a seamless experience. It's really just a technical decision made on Gawker's end.
And the editorial folks are the ones who give Vidler the video. Vidler then just uploads whatever the editorial people say, right?
Correct.
So we've heard some testimony earlier in the trial about the video appearing on websites other than Gawker.com. Did Gawker Media authorize the Hulk Hogan video to be published on any other site?
No, it did not.
Did y'all give permission for it to be posted on any other site?
No, the company did not.
Did y'all seek to have the video show up on other sites?
No.
Did you distribute the video at all?
Onto other sites other than on Gawker.com, no.
Did you make it available for downloading?
No, there's not a download button.
So in 2012, part of your job was in charge of finance, right?
That's correct.
What was the primary way that Gawker Media made money back in 2012?
The primary revenue source was display advertising.
And if you recall, what percentage of Gawker Media's revenue was from display advertising?
Something like 90%.
Okay, so and again, we're talking about in 2012, right?
Correct.
If we could just look back at Defendant's Exhibit 77. There's been quite a bit of discussion about this already, but you recall that there weren't any ads that ran on this post?
Correct. There are no ads on this page.
Were there any ads on the video?
No.
And was the reason that, well, what was the reason that there were no ads on this post?
It's really just that advertisers have indicated that they don't like to have their ads appear adjacent to not safe for work content.
So, as I guess the head of finance back in 2012, did Gawker make any money directly from publishing this post?
It did not.
Why not?
Because the way that Gawker would earn display advertising revenue is it was paid when an ad appeared on the page or when there was an ad impression. And since there were no ads on this page, there were no ad impressions, and so there would be no advertising revenue from this page.
Stepping back, just beyond looking at this page directly, did the post benefit Gawker's revenues in any other way?
It's certainly possible. I think it's possible that readers had clicked off onto another page from this page, and they may have seen advertising on those pages. But the effect the effect in terms of the broader company revenue, I'd say it's marginal.
So what you're saying is if somebody came to this page and then said, oh, there's some other story on the side of the page, clicks on that, if there was advertising on that page, it's possible that some revenue came from that second click.
That's correct.
But the overall impact on Gawker's revenues was what, would you say?
Marginal, I'd say. Very, very small.
One of the things that has been discussed quite a bit in the case is increased traffic. And I guess this is no secret, you've been involved in this litigation for a bit. The plaintiff has pointed to increased traffic to this post as added value and revenue for Gawker. To your mind, as former effectively CFO, is that right?
I mean, it's obviously a good thing to have a lot of readers come to a website and read a story, but the reality is, we would call them spikes internally, because on the traffic graph you'd see the unique visitors go up and it would come down really right after. And though we would hope a small number of people would one day come back and visit again, the reality is, at least in my experience, that the great majority don't come back.
So, I mean, in sort of regular speak, you're kind of hoping that a spike results in repeat business and that's how you might make some revenue?
Yeah, I mean, you hope that readers find stories that are interesting to them, and if a lot of readers find a certain story interesting to them, you'd hope they would come back. But the reality, just kind of the internet, is that the great majority of them don't.
Switching gears just ever so slightly, back in 2012, did Gawker keep track of its revenues on a monthly basis?
It did.
And this is just company-wide. Gawker Media kept track of its revenue on a monthly basis?
Yes.
Tim, can we pull up Defendant's Exhibit 364? And if you could just blow that up to focus on the 2012 timeframe. All right, so, Mr. Kidder, would you just explain to the jury what it is, generally, this whole document that we're looking at, and then we'll talk about the specifics in a second.
Sure. So this is a spreadsheet that shows every year from, that shows every month from, I think, January 2010 to May 2014, and for each month it lists the revenue for Gawker Media LLC as a whole.
And when you're talking about revenue, that's all dollars coming into Gawker, right?
Correct. That's all revenue. That's the display revenue I referenced earlier. That's at least 90% of the revenue, especially then, and any other revenue that there may be as well.
Okay, so this does not show anything about profit. This is just strictly dollars coming into the company.
Correct. This is just money coming in before any expenses are paid.
Now, over the years, did you notice any pattern in monthly revenue?
Generally, we find that the fourth quarter is the largest because advertisers want to advertise around the holiday time, and that first quarter is the softest because people just don't seek to advertise as much in the beginning of the year. But really, it can be erratic even within months of those quarters, or really, among months of the year. So there's some patterns, but nothing, 100% always definitive.
So when we're looking at this data, just to make sure we're both on the same page, we're looking at Gawker Media as a whole. We're looking at the revenue for, at this time, all 8 websites, right?
That's correct. It's all the money coming in before expenses across all of the sites.
And what were the revenues then for the entire company, all 8 of those sites, in October 2012?
A little over $2.7 million.
So $2.7 million, all 8 websites coming in October 2012?
Correct.
At that time period in 2012, did y'all also keep track of revenue by website?
We did.
Tim, can we pull up Defendant's Exhibit 365? And why don't we just zoom in on that same 2012? Mr. Kidder, what is this document that we're looking at?
So this is similar to the one we just looked at, except instead of revenues across all 8 sites across the entire company, this is revenues on Gawker.com.
Okay, so this is just looking at the one website, Gawker.com, right?
Correct.
And again, this is revenue coming in attributed to Gawker.com.
Yes, this is money coming in the door attributed to Gawker.com.
And how would you, or how did the company determine whether revenue was booked or accredited to Gawker.com versus Gizmodo.com versus
Yeah,
Jalopnik?
so I'd say these numbers are pretty good, but they're not 100% perfect. And the reason is some advertisers come and only want to buy an ad on Gawker.com. And so in that case, it's easy through the accounting system to attribute the revenue directly to Gawker.com. Other advertisers come in and say they'd like to buy ads on a basket of websites, so maybe Gawker.com as well as Gizmodo, and they don't really care which site it shows on, they just want it to be one of those. In those cases, it wouldn't show here because the revenue is not directly attributable to Gawker.com. But the great majority of display revenue is directly associated with a site in the accounting system, and so therefore would show here. So again, it's a pretty good guide, but it's not a rock solid number.
It sounds like this is just a reasonable estimate of the revenue attributed to Gawker.com.
Yeah, that's a fair characterization.
Now, according to this data from 2012, how much revenue did Gawker.com have in October 2012?
So this says it was just a little under $55,000.
Just looking through the months of that year, that seems particularly low. Why is that?
Yeah, that's definitely low. I'd call it an outlier. Really, as I said earlier, the advertising revenue can just vary across the company. And then if you consider you have eight sites, sometimes it can take only one campaign to really make a site's month, as it were. If an entertainment client wanted to advertise on a certain site because a movie was coming out, that could significantly change these numbers. So I would say it definitely is a outlier, but I wouldn't attribute it to anything specific other than just kind of the random nature of how advertising dollars land.
So, in this time period of 2011, 2012, 2013, how much revenue per month was Gawker.com generally taking in?
Yeah, I'd say on average somewhere around 150 to 250, maybe $300,000 is a fair kind of average across a longer time period.
Tim, is there a way to put that defendant's 364 next to 365 with the 2012 numbers side by side? So, Mr. Kidder, I believe on the left here, those are the revenues month by month for 2012 for Gawker Media as a whole?
That's correct.
And then on the right, these are the numbers that we were just looking at for Gawker.com revenue for 2012 by month.
That's correct.
Now, just looking at October 2012, company-wide, how much revenue was taken in?
A little over $2.7 million.
And then you had mentioned before, it was roughly $55,000 for Gawker.com.
Yeah.
So what percentage of the company's overall revenue that month was attributable to Gawker.com?
It's a pretty low percentage. In that specific month, I'd say less than 5%.
In other months, as you said, this is kind of an aberration. In other months, generally, what percentage of the company's revenue was attributable to Gawker.com?
I'd say generally overall it was something closer to 10%.
And there's 8 sites, so was Gawker on the leading edge of revenue producers or somewhere in the middle, towards the bottom?
Probably towards the middle bottom. Again, if you have 8 sites, 10% isn't that crazy. But I do think it's safe to say that Gawker.com wasn't one of the revenue leading sites.
What were the revenue leading sites in that time?
They were generally the technology sites like Gizmodo and Lifehacker.
So why don't we shift from talking about numbers of dollars and talk about other kinds of numbers here.
Okay.
As part of your job as COO, switching from the sort of CFO hat to COO hat, you were familiar with sort of general data about the company, the number of posts, the traffic, things like that?
Yes.
At this time in 2012, there were 8 different websites. Do you know how many posts were published company-wide for all 8 websites in 2012?
Somewhere around 100,000 posts in total.
Do you know how many Gawker.com published that year?
I don't off the top of my head.
Tim, can you pull up Defendant's Exhibit 565 and focus, I believe, on the top box? Sorry, the bottom box. I need my distance glasses. What is this document that we're looking at?
So this is a screenshot of a database query made on the Gawker Media servers, adding up the number of posts in 2012 by each of the 8 sites.
And does this refresh your recollection about how many posts Gawker.com published?
Yeah, so in 2012, Gawker had just over 10,000 posts.
Gawker.com, the Gawker.com
Yes,
website.
Gawker.com.
And how does that stack up against the other websites?
I'd say it's in the bottom half, but the middle tier.
Okay, so what this shows is Kotaku published almost 18,000. Gizmodo published between 16 and 17,000.
That's correct.
And so those were the leaders, and then these other sites like Jalopnik and Lifehacker at that time were on the lower end.
That's correct.
So looking at this all told, is this how you got the number 90 to 100,000 total posts?
Yes, so if you add all these together, I think it's somewhere around 90 to 100,000.
And so the Hulk Hogan post that we're here about is one of these 90 to 100,000 posts?
That's correct.
I want to kind of drill down and talk about traffic now. And the first thing that I want to talk about is monthly traffic. Back in October 2012, how did Gawker.com measure its readership generally to its whole site?
So generally, the primary metric would be looking at U.S. unique visitors within a given month using something called Quantcast. And a simpler way of saying that is it's the number of people, roughly, in the United States that read any one of the sites.
Okay. And the Quantcast is the service that provides that data?
Yes, Quantcast is a third-party service that tracks that in order to kind of ensure that it's accurate.
Okay, I'm going to hand you a stack of documents that are Quantcast printouts.
Thank you.
So I'll tell you just to speed things along. I've given you 5 different documents. They're defendants' exhibits 137, 138, 139, 140, and 141. And hopefully they're in there in order. I tried to get them, hopefully didn't mix it up. And what these show, and tell me if this is right based on what you looked at, what they show is the time period for Gawker.com for monthly unique users in the U.S. from October 2011 all the way through April 2013.
That's correct.
Tim, can you just pull up Defendant's Exhibit 138? Mr. Kidder, what is this that we're looking at?
So this is a screenshot of Quantcast.com showing the U.S. uniques on Gawker.com from the time period of October 1st, 2011 to April 2013.
And there's a box there that has some numbers in it, September 1, 2012 through September 30th. What does that show?
So that means the cursor was on September, and that's showing the number of unique visitors broken out by mobile web uniques and desktop computer as opposed to people on the phone uniques.
And then in the top left-hand corner on the screen now, there's another number that says uniques and then 12,600,000.
Yes, and so that's the total of unique visitors. That's the number that we generally look at.
So when you, at Gawker Media at this time, those are the numbers you're looking at for months' performance on the site. Right?
Correct.
And again, this is measuring the number of different people who visited Gawker.com during a particular month.
Yeah, the unique visitor metric is kind of a crude approximation of the number of people that visited during a specific month, because a lot of people have different devices. Maybe they have a computer at home, maybe they have a computer at work, maybe they have a phone or an iPhone, and it's difficult to tell that 1, 2, 3 devices are only one person. So it's really better thought of a metric of unique devices, but it's certainly a pretty good proxy for people, and it's the primary thing that we look at.
To kind of speed things along, Tim, would you mind pulling up the blue demonstrative that we used with Mr. Anderson last week that shows this data? Perfect. So, Mr. Kidder, if you would just take a second and flip through the stack of paper I just gave you and double check the numbers that are on this chart to make sure I've got them right. This shows that same period of time from October 2011 through April of 2013, and then I've now just put in the monthly numbers.
Yep.
Okay, so that's all right?
That is correct.
So just, if you could, just walk through the various months that are marked on there and explain what it shows.
So, you know, if you start in May 2012, it was kind of a low, at least relative to this chart. Then I think leading to the summer, you see a big buildup, peaking in October with 14.1 million, a big drop in November with 9.5 million, peaking again in December, and then eventually decreasing to 12.7 million in
So, looking at this chart, let me ask this a different way. In your experience, do popular posts lead to sustained increases in traffic to the website?
So no, I mean, obviously a popular post is a good thing, and it's a good thing to have a lot of readers on your site. But as I spoke about a little earlier, the majority of readers we found tend not to come back.
So on this chart, you just said there's a growth rate between that May, September into October period. What does that show you?
So that shows kind of steady, sustained increase month over month, which generally, isn't something that can be done on the back of only 1, 2, or 3 stories. It's really kind of sustained editorial growth. And that's what you want ultimately, but that's very difficult generally to achieve.
Have you ever heard the term inflection point?
I have.
And what does that mean?
An inflection point is at the point at which time things just kind of seem to take off and do very well.
And do you see an inflection point on this chart?
I'd say that May, June time, is an inflection point. Again, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, several months of sustained editorial growth, which is challenging.
What about in October 2012? Was that an inflection point?
It's a peak, but then you see it decrease significantly in November. In December, maybe you hit the highs of October, and then it's kind of decreasing from there.
So looking at this, can you tell whether the sustained growth, that peak in October, was that sustained over time?
It was not.
And what does that tell you?
That whatever kind of editorial momentum had been built up in that month wasn't sustainable over a longer period of time.
Now, looking back in that period of time and putting back on your CFO hat, in October 2012, was there a bonus program for editorial staff at Gawker?
There was.
And how did that work?
So the site leads and the sites as a whole would have a U.S. unique visitors target, the same number we've been speaking about, and the meeting or exceeding of which could get them a bonus.
And how would they receive that bonus?
So the bonus was a percentage of their editorial payroll. So a percentage of any given site's payroll capped at 20%. That percentage would be based on how far they exceeded their traffic target.
And that target was based on what?
The target was based on a 6-month rolling average, so an average of the prior 6 months. So it rewarded sustained growth.
And so if in the prior 6 months you're getting 10 million readers, if there's a 10% bump in this month, what does that mean for the bonus?
So if they exceeded their target by 10%, then they would get 10% of their payroll budget as a bonus pool to be distributed.
And I think you said this, it was capped?
Yes, it was capped at 20%. So if you exceeded your bonus, if you exceeded your target by 20%, you got 20%. If you exceeded your target by 50%, you got 20%.
And why was that done?
It was capped because really kind of big blowout months, though they're great, it's not a sustainable increase. And more importantly, we can't monetize, or certainly back then in 2012, the company didn't have the ability to monetize. So it was looking for really sustained editorial growth, and that's what it was designed to reward.
And the bonuses were based on the site as a whole, not a particular post?
Correct. They looked at the site-wide numbers that we were looking at just a second ago.
So they're like these Quantcast numbers?
Correct.
For the month of October 2012, do you recall whether the website, Gawker.com, did its folks qualify for a bonus?
I remember that in October 2012, it did get its maximum bonus, so 20% of its payroll budget.
And I know you were asked about this at your deposition, and my recollection is that you said you didn't recall the details from that month. Did you go back and look after your deposition and went up to this trial to see how that bonus was distributed?
I did.
And when you looked, how many staffers at Gawker.com received a bonus that month?
AJ chose to give a bonus to all of the staffers.
Did he give himself a bonus?
He did.
Do you recall how much that was?
He gave himself a $2,000 bonus, and he gave all the other staffers a bonus between $1,000 to $3,000.
During that time period in 2012, how often, just roughly, did Gawker.com earn a bonus, the editorial staff at Gawker?
I'd say about half the time it earned a bonus.
And how often would they hit that 20% maximum?
I'd say about half of those times, so about 25% of the total time.
Why don't we shift back to your COO capacity and talk a little bit more about traffic and analytics. And shifting gears from the big picture about the site, I want to kind of narrow down to individual posts. What service did Gawker use to measure traffic to individual posts?
So Quantcast doesn't have the ability to zoom down to the individual post, so we would use a service called Google Analytics if you wanted to look at data around a specific post.
And what is Google Analytics?
Google Analytics is a piece of software made by Google that lets you analyze your web traffic and kind of slice and dice it in a bunch of different ways.
Is that data, the Google Analytics data about specific posts, is that something that you look at frequently?
It's not something we'd look at often. 100,000 posts a year. Generally, you look at the sites in aggregate by month, but it is something we'd look at from time to time.
All right. What I'd like to do is just spend a few minutes looking at those Google Analytics for this particular post. Tim, can we bring up Plaintiff's Exhibit 211? Mr. Cater, what is it that we're looking at now?
So this is a screenshot of Google Analytics looking at data around the Hogan post from the period of October 4th, 2012 to June 30th, 2013.
Okay, so this shows when the post went up in October 2012 and then runs out from there?
Correct.
Looking at this document, how many total views were there according to this chart? And Tim, I think it's in the top. If you could just blow up the first 3 lines, that's perfect. How many total views?
So the total page views during this time were 8.6 million.
And what is a page view according to Google Analytics?
So a page view is simply the number of times the story is read. So if you read it today, if you read it yesterday, if you read it the day before, that's 3 page views. If I read it once, it's another page view. If you look at it from your phone, that's another page view. It's the simplest metric. It's just the number of times the story has been read or loaded on a browser.
Right, so it's just every time somebody clicks on the story, it brings it up, that counts as a page view.
Correct.
Then there's another number next to it that says unique page views.
Yes.
You see that? How many unique page views were there for the Hogan post?
A little over 5.3 million.
And what is a unique page view?
So a unique page view is the number of times a given device has loaded a page. So if you look at it today on your home computer, you look at it tomorrow on your home computer, and a third day on your home computer, that's only 1 unique page view. If I look at it, you look at it, and your friend looks at it, that's 3 unique page views. So it's a little more of a granular metric, and it's the number of times any given device, such as a phone or a computer, has loaded a specific story.
Okay, so this is looking at it from that device perspective. As you say, you look at it from your home computer, that's 1 unique view. You look at it again from your office, that's 2 unique views, right?
Correct.
But then if you look at it multiple times from those devices, that would go in the total page view column?
Correct.
So does that explain why there's the difference between the 5.3 million and 8.6?
Yeah, it suggests that a lot of devices loaded the page multiple times, maybe to read the comments, maybe to look at it again, but that suggests that many of the devices, the story was loaded more than once.
So here, it appears that at least there's a 3.3 million difference, meaning that above and beyond the unique page views, people were loading it multiple times, 3.3 million total.
Correct.
Let's bear down on October for just a minute here. Actually, Tim, can we just put I apologize. Can we just put 211 back up for a moment and look at the chart? At the top of the page. All right. So, Mr. Goodwright, I think you had said that this chart shows the distribution of views for a period starting in October 2012 and then running on out to June 2013?
That's correct.
What does this chart show you about the distribution of when those views happened?
So it shows that the great majority of views were within the week and the week following of the publication of the post.
All right. But this shows it on a macro view over a number of months, right?
Correct. It's many, many months.
Is it possible to look at it a little bit more specifically just for the month of October?
Yes, it's a setting you can change in the view.
So Tim, now we'll go to Defendants Exhibit 874. Defendants 874. I apologize. So Mr. Kidder, what is this that we're looking at now?
So this is a screenshot for a much more narrow period from October 4th to November 2nd, 2012.
And again, this is a Google Analytics chart?
Correct. This is a screenshot from Google Analytics.
And this, again, is just for the Hogan post?
Correct.
This is different from the other chart because it's just showing that 1 month period?
Correct.
Tim, if you could zoom in just on the graph part of this for the first part of the month. Take it on out a little further, please. Mr. Kidder, according to this data, what does this show you about the page views of the Hogan post?
It shows a big jump at publication, well, not just a big jump, but the majority of the views. It decreases. There's a tiny little bump on October 9th. It decreases in a tiny little bump around October 16th.
Okay, so the big jump is right after the post happened.
Correct.
And that's when most of the views occurred?
Correct.
And as it starts to go down, there's I think you said just a tiny hiccup bump right there around October 9th? And then it goes down again?
Looks like that to me, yes.
And then it bumps back up around October 15th, 16th?
Correct.
And then if we can pull back out to me. And then what happens the rest of the month?
And then it really plateaus and views are marginal, if any.
If we could, Tim, go back to Plaintiff's Exhibit 211. If you wanted to know, Mr. Kidder, how many of Gawker.com's page views were attributable to the Hulk Hogan post, what would you look at?
If you zoom into that top row of the page views column, Google Analytics actually shows you how any given post compares to the whole.
So this is where we were looking before?
Yes, except in kind of tiny, hard to read gray text. Within the given period, it'll tell you the total number of page views just on Gawker.com, so just those 1 of 8 sites, and then the percentage of a total it represents.
And so what this is showing us, again, this is the chart that shows from October 2012 when the post went up all the way through June 2013?
Correct. This is a longer time period.
And so over that period of time, the percentage of total page views that were attributable to the Hogan post for Gawker.com was what percent?
Was about 1.14%. And again, that's just to Gawker.com, the one of 8 websites.
But is there a way to look at this from the whole company's perspective, at how many page views, what percentage of page views were attributed to the Hogan post, not just to Gawker.com?
You could, but they're different instances. They're different kind of Google Analytics systems. So you'd have to go into each one and write down the number of page views.
So let me... Mr. Kidder, I'm going to hand you a document that's been marked as Defendants 566.
Okay.
What is this document?
This looks like a series of screenshots from Google Analytics detailing some stats for 2012 and 2013 about each of the Gawker websites.
Those documents show the total page views for each site for 2012?
Correct, they do.
Tim, may I display the demonstrative that shows the page views for 2012? So, looking at defendants 566, Mr. Kidder, do the numbers up here correspond to the total page views for each of the websites?
Let's look. Yes, they seem to.
Okay, so this shows that in 2012, Gawker had how many total page views?
A little over 1 billion,
And Gizmodo had how many?
about 1.5 billion.
And then just going through, this is how many hundreds of millions of page views there were throughout the company.
Correct.
And the total at the bottom there, what number is that?
It's about 7.2 billion.
And what does that mean?
So that means there were stories on the full 8 Gawker media sites were loaded about 7.2 billion times.
Now, earlier we saw that the Hogan post got 8.6 million views even into 2013, halfway through 2013.
That's correct.
If we were just to use that number, even though it goes a little farther, roughly what percentage of total views of Gawker as a company did the Hogan post account for in that time period?
My mental math is a bit shaky, but it's something like 0.1%.
All right, and so what exactly does that mean?
That means that of all the stories being loaded across the Gawker Media Network in 2012, about 0.1% of those stories being loaded were the Hulk Hogan post.
Just one last topic that I want to touch on. Earlier, we had looked at the page and that had the Hogan post. And we looked at the video, and you had mentioned that the video is hosted by a different company.
Correct.
And that company is Vidler.
That's correct.
And I think what you explained earlier is that in order to play that video, somebody would have to click the play button.
That's correct.
Now, at this time, was data about that play button tracked?
It is tracked by Vidler, the third-party video system.
So much like you have Google Analytics for the text portion of your site, Vidler did something similar for the video portion.
That's correct.
And that data was accessible to you as effectively the COO of the
Yes.
company? Tim, can you pull up Defendant's Exhibit 343? Mr. Kidder, what is this exhibit?
So this is a screenshot of the Vidler Analytics interface for the Hulk Hogan video.
And what period of time does this show?
October 4th of 2012 to I think July of 2013.
All right. Now, you understand the video came down in April 2013, right?
Correct.
And so this just goes on a little bit longer?
Yeah.
Is that, why is that? Is that when?
I guess the document, whoever was accessing this report had put in those dates as the parameters.
Okay. Now, looking at this document, if you could focus him on the bottom right quarter of the page. Looking at this document, how many times was the video viewed?
Yeah, it's a little confusing. On the broader page, I think it rounds to the nearest million up top or something. But down here, it shows a more precise number of video views, which is 2.5 million.
And what does that mean? Does that mean that 2.5 million people watched this?
So that means the play button was clicked 2.5 million times. That doesn't mean that they watched the whole video.
Looking back at thinking back to the Google Analytics where we talked about total page views and unique page views, with this number of views, are we talking total views or unique views?
This is total views, so it corresponds to the page views number, roughly.
So we don't know how many unique views there were of the video.
Correct.
Some of these could have been repeat views.
Correct.
Somebody could have clicked play more than once.
Yes.
How does this 2.5 million number compare to the 8.6 million page views that we just looked at?
It's less than half. It's smaller,
I mean, it's about a third of the number.
something like that.
So what does that, looking just at this document, what else does this document tell us about plays of the video?
So towards the bottom, it tells you it tells you what percentage of those views and how far they got to certain benchmarks. So not everyone who plays the video is going to watch the entire thing. So it tells us that only 57% of those 2.5 million views actually watched the full video.
And so over 40% did not watch the whole video.
Correct.
And again, this is just measuring the people who pressed play, right?
Yes.
And so looking at this, it says 80% of the people watched 50% of the video. Is that what that?
That's correct.
Tim, if you could pull back up Plaintiff's Exhibit 211 one more time. And could just focus on those three numbers that you were focusing on, first three in the chart, please. And if you could just expand a little bit to get the unique page views portion up there. The titles of the columns, please. There we go. So looking back at this post, this is the Google Analytics of the post, right?
That's correct.
On there was some discussion earlier in the trial of average time on page. Do you see that?
I do.
And underneath, it says the average time on the page was 1 minute, 52 seconds. Do you see that?
I do.
What does that number mean?
So that's the average time that a given reader was on the post.
When you say the post, you mean the page with the commentary?
Yes, the page with the commentary and the video and the comments and everything else.
So thinking about this 1 minute, 52 second number, the total page views, and then the video page that we just looked at that shows the number of views of the video and the length of play, what do these two pieces of data tell you?
Well, given that we know that so few of the page views played the video, much less completed the full thing, it suggests that a lot of people spend a lot of time either reading the commentary, reading the comments, or doing something else on the page other than playing the video.
And how do you know that?
Well, if you know that Google Analytics is able to measure the time on page, and you know that the Vidler Analytics is able to measure the number of views and how much of the video they watched, the only other thing to do on the page, unless you were just kind of sitting there doing nothing, was to read the lengthy commentary and to read the comments and everything else.
So kind of encapsulating all this data, approximately 70% of the views of the page did not look at the video, right?
Correct.
And of the less than 30% of the views that then played the video, around 40% of around 57% watched the whole thing, right?
That's correct.
And so how are people spending their time on this page?
Well, I have to imagine that they're either reading the commentary or engaging in the discussion, but we certainly know that the great majority of them aren't watching the video, much less watching the whole video.
Thank you. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Oh, great.